Why? Why? How do you even know what I'm doing? Okay, well, hello. So today in this lesson we're going to look at backhand hooks, and apologies, I'm chewing a throat sweet, such as I always have bad throats. In the lead up to this, I was doing a lot of research. I was looking at different Yiquan people who are doing a kind of backhand hook punch. And what's really interesting about that is you find that they all do it completely differently. And the question then arises, well, when I say completely differently, I mean completely differently. So you've got big looping hooks, you've got little shorting dinks, you've got people doing farley on the end of the posture, people doing farley before the posture, you've got every conceivable different kind of variation you can imagine. And the question will arise therefore, particularly for a beginner, what's the right way of doing it within the Yiquan paradigm? Now, that's a perfectly legitimate question, but what Yiquan practitioners hear when you say that is, what's the way my teacher did it? You know, what the way they interpret what is the right way to do it is, what is the way my teacher did it? And they just assume that that is the right way, and that then leads to all the kind of factionalism and ridiculous arguments that we see all the time. But in many ways, who your teacher is very much a coincidence, so it's just down to chance. It's like if you trained with someone else, you'd think that the way they did it was the right way to do it, and so on. So it's not a very scientific approach to considering what is the right way to do a hook punch. Even if it's not all that much of a coincidence, you can also still see differences. So very interestingly, you'll see that Yao Chengguang has much more of a rotational movement on his posture, whereas his brother Yao Chengrong has very much this kind of leaning over farley. We haven't really looked at it yet, but the kind of shift over to the side farley, where you shift your whole body over to the side to get power into the posture. So it's slightly different variations, even with people who are trained the same person. And then if you look at people who trained with Yao Zhongzun even earlier, then you see this kind of very big looping and then a big lock point on the end. So what's the right way to do it? So what I would encourage people to do now is think beyond that paradigm, particularly people who practice Yiquan. I know it's hard. I know when you belong to something and you taught a way to do it and you just think that's the way. Well, we try to evolve the discipline itself into a more scientific, conceptual basis, not just physical basis. And I'd encourage people to think completely differently. Don't hear, what is the right way to do this according to my teacher? In your mind here, what is the right way to do this to solve a particular specific problem? And that changes everything. So all different variations can be right, but it depends, is it applicable to this particular problem that we're thinking about? So I also looked at some of the videos, people teaching backhand hook for Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, and to my mind, it's like the opposite problem. It's hyper task specific focused, and that task is always the same, even though the way people are teaching it, very interestingly, is different across those disciplines. All the people who are teaching it look like they can really handle themselves, but the theory and the technique that they're teaching is all different, which is really interesting. Even within, for example, within boxing, within MMA, you've got people teaching different variations, but it's all hyper-focused on the same problem, which is how do you hit somebody in the side of the head really, really hard? And you would think that makes sense, but we want to think a little bit differently as we're learning in Yiquan, because the idea is we're trying to develop an intuitive system so that you can kind of respond in infinite varieties of the same posture to form a configuration to hit. And really that's what every martial art is doing. Obviously it's not about that, it's about the explanation for the way the technique is taught. What's the pedagogy? Because that can lead to problems further down the line. For example, I saw one MMA person say, keep the hook completely flat. And I saw another one saying, always chop down like this. Now, if you train people and drill people like that, it's always got to be like this. And there's different rationales for it. It's always got to be like that. Well, then later on, it becomes more difficult to say, well, you want to be able to vary it to any possible angle. Whereas in each one, we want to start right from the start thinking like, well, We want to vary it in any possible angle. So just like everyone else, we have a template posture, but you've got to think scientifically about the rationale for that template posture. What's our rationale? It's the doctrine of the mean. It's the middle ground. So if we're hitting flat this way, we also want to think about hitting on every other angle. So then we also want to think like, well, that's not going to be enough to give us a kind of intuitive overall ability. So we're going to think, we want to be able to hit flat, we want to be able to hit up, and we want to be able to hit down. If you can do those three things, then you can pretty much hit on any angle. You can extend it to any angle. But we also just don't want to think like that anyway. That's still focused in the area of techniques and application. And remember, Wang Xiangzhai says techniques are secondary. So you've got to get your head around it first. If you just totally focused on the actual application of the technique, I want to hit someone really hard in the side of the head, then you're caught at that level of technique, and then you just start thinking about how the technique itself is constructed. Whereas we want to think about movement quality principles, and we want to think about how we teach those movement quality principles step by step. The doctrine of the mean is one part of that, so we want some kind of template posture that's in the middle of everything, and everyone does that. All different martial arts do that anyway. They have a template posture, and that's the basic idea. But that is brought into a little bit of question if people start saying, well, always hit down like that, always hit down into the side of the jaw, something like that. That doesn't suggest the idea that you can do it in infinite different varieties. So it's not quite the same concept actually as having a template posture, and from there thinking that you can vary it infinite degrees along these lines. But we also want to focus on the core basis of each one, which is our physical movement paradigm, our quintessence movement skills. So our problem that we want to solve first of all isn't that we want to hit someone in the side of the head really hard. It's that we want to bring all the skills that we've been learning so far, all the body movement consistency skills, into hitting an object, and that we don't want to lose everything that we've built so far. So the answer to the question, like what's the right way to do it, is to rephrase the question, what's the right way to do it to teach someone in Yiquan to maintain those quintessence movement skills with a template posture that can then be adapted into other postures, but nevertheless doesn't obscure all the gains we've made in terms of our physical movement, consistency, structure, lock points, and so on. Where does that leave us? It leaves us exactly where we were. So a lot of what we've looked at in terms of the lead hand hook and the jab cross that we've looked at can be applied now to the backhand hook as we use a template posture. It's going to be quite a long hook, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It leaves us there, but we have to do pretty much all of our basic training like this, all our basic postures that we've looked at, all the basic punches. You can't just think like, well, if I've done lead hand hook, practicing it quite light and bringing it up to the light hitting point, well, that's enough for the backhand hook. No, because all of this stuff in each one is quite abstract about Hun Yuan Li and the way we skew postures and the way that we bring the power to one point within a configuration and so on. It's all quite abstract. To concretize it, we've got to actually start hitting things, just like later on we've actually got to start sparring, otherwise it's not concrete. You can have all the theory in the world, and Wang Xiangzhai says this within Chinese Wushu. There's people who've got all the theory in the world and they can't do it. And that's pretty forward thinking, I think. It's a little like you could ask ChatGPT to explain how to use each one principles, and it'll tell you, because it'll just harvest the theory that everyone else is talking about. But you've got to be able to use actual skill to hit things and hit people. And to do that, we've got to build it. We've got to build it constructively. Everything we've talked about in terms of hitting a bag and what that does in terms of feedback into the body. But when you change to a different posture, everything changes as well. The posture itself is different, so the feedback and the way it works is different, and that's more data. But the positive thing is we don't have to do this forever. There's a limit to how many basic postures we've got to practice hitting light on the bag. There's a big limit to that, and it's not a very high limit. All our basic postures, jab, cross, our hooks, uppercuts, chopping down, chopping up, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then straight through. That's pretty much it. If you can start practicing like that, then that's it for punches. Then we move on to things like you know, our forearm strikes, shoulder strikes, and then later on the movements from the natural set, all the big clotheslines and hitting up and hitting down and this kind of thing. And the same for kicks as well. We've got to do quite like just feeling the energy of the posture, just exactly the same way, because that feedback of hitting an object rebounds back into the body and gives you feedback and helps you learn how to balance and maintain structure. It's simple, but you don't have to do that forever. At a certain point, the body just adapts to all that data and it can form the configuration onto the next level, and we've 95% pointed it. So that's the big talk up, and everything else we kind of need to know. We know the process now of the exercises that we need to do, so let's get straight into doing those. So just as before, we can get our where do we stand, or by now you've probably got a fairly natural sense of where the posture is, like that. A natural sense of what we call the range. We call it range, not distance, because range is all about, it's very dynamic, so we're moving in and out of range when we start doing two-person stuff and sparring and thinking about range and range control and things like that. But we start like everything else very basic, and we get our range right, yay far usually from the lead hand. And what we're going to do, we're going to turn from the axis in the body, and we're just going to turn and we're going to swing out like that and dink in. It's not going to be a big swing like that. Remember, we talked about if you start doing big swings, you're hitting with the wrong part of the hand, particularly if you're hitting flat like that. You can get away with it like that with gloves on, because you're going to be hitting with that part of the hand with gloves on. It doesn't matter that much. If you do a big swing like that in, hitting more to the side like that, I can feel straight away that was right on my thumb. Like that. Oh, you break your thumb easy doing that. Like, yeah, if I did that even with a little bit more power, I'd probably just break my thumb easy. So remember, we let go of that. We let go of that. Don't make that critical mistake thinking like, well, in each one, the pitch is like this. And when people talk about, you know, there's all these videos on, should you do it like this? Should you do it like this? And it was like, oh, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, it might not matter with gloves on. And this is why we have in each one, like bare knuckle, no rules, not as some kind of glorified fantasy street fight badass thing, just as a scientific thing. Like, we build up from here. We can manipulate rules like wearing gloves and things like that, but we begin from the reality of the human body, the human form. So we think instead that there's like about 35 degrees off the centre line, and that's going to hit in straight like that. It's going to hit in flat. In fact, it's even going to hit in with the back three knuckles in classic Yiquan style. I mean, we've talked before, there's multiple reasons for that. One, it brings the knuckles in alignment with the forearm, but also you can see now it pulls the thumb a little bit out. So we can't see. If I do it that way, if I hit in with the three knuckles, it pulls the thumb further away from the target in the way that hitting the two knuckles in doesn't. And that might seem like it doesn't matter, but it certainly does matter if you start hitting on the side like that. You want the thumb out of the way as soon as possible. So from there, then we just bring it up to a really light hit. We want to feel all the feedback that we can from the posture. So we bring it up to hit and stop and hold the posture like this, like that. One of the things we really want to start doing now, when I've been talking about this idea of using the shoulders and where is the attention, where is the movement triggered from, and where do we put our intent. So, and I've talked about people who put their intent in their hand, and you can always see that because the hand goes first like that, and you always see it in these big looping movements like that. The hand goes first, and the body gets behind the punch like that. I'm not saying that's wrong at all, you know, that's going to spark you out if someone does it like that properly and catches you. It's probably going to do, might not knock you out, but it's going to do some damage if it catches you full clean on. It's not about that, it's about scientifically analysing the actual physical processes, the biomechanical processes. We want to do it differently, we want to think about being very mindful of leading from this virtual reality axis. In reality, just moving from the torso and then just sticking the hand out like that into like a spike. There's no looping. We don't want that looping. I mean, we're certainly seeing it. Or some of the videos I was looking at, certainly seeing each one, people doing like big loops, and then putting the zing on with the Farley at the end of it into it. But we're going to look at this much more, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But we're taking away this movement. We're taking away this big looping movement, but we're not getting rid of it because it's about power, and big postures generate power if they're done right, putting more space into the posture. I don't want to go too much into this today because I go into it in a lot of detail in some videos that are coming up about articulated force. But we move this loop and we put that movement instead back in the body. So then that allows us to take that loop out, just have a straight dink in like that. And the movement instead is moved from there and put into the movement of the body, particularly around the Farley. And hit like that. Let's do it the other way. So much torque. So nice and light. Hit and stop. And as you lift up into the posture, don't lift up your chin like that. And we can say here, like there's other people who talk about sinking in each one you should always sink your posture, like you should always drop down into the. And as a saint, each one should reveal all mysteries. So I saw two MMA guys. One was, it doesn't matter who they are. One was talking about doing the backhand hook and saying you always chop down like that, and the rationale is so that you can hit on the jawline. And the other one was saying whatever you do, always hit the backhand hook in completely flat. And yet when he did it chopping down. When he started doing it with power on the bag, he started chopping it down immediately. I thought, this is interesting, isn't it? Like the idea of, yeah, okay, it's legitimate to say you want to target hitting down on the jawline. It's exactly the same thing with planting, fisting. Each one you want to target as a general idea. But that's such a specific target to think that that's going to determine your entire use of the cross, which can actually be used in multiple different ways and varied. And you're going to think, well, it's always got to chop down because it's always got to be targeting hitting the jawline. That to me doesn't make any sense. And when I saw the other guy hitting the bag and dropping down, I realised, right, okay. They're both MMA guys, so like, they're both serious fighters, and it's not about that. Wang Xiangzhai talks about this issue of people being able to do stuff, but their explanation for it is wrong. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, like, and how often that happens. And I'm seeing loads and loads of stuff like that, I have to say. It doesn't matter if I can't beat that person in a fight. It's a scientific question. Like, does their explanation actually genuinely match the posture, the thing that they're trying to explain? And what Wang Xiangzhai says is, if it doesn't, then they teach their students wrong, and their students can't get it because they're trying to follow the teaching of the instructor that's wrong. Actually, this idea of hitting down into the jawline, although it might be a valid concept, that doesn't actually explain why anyone would always punch down like that with the hook. When I saw the other guy talk about doing it completely flat and then chopping down with it when he actually did it on the back, then it just clicked. It's the same thing as when some Yiquan people are like, you've always got to sink. You've always got to sink the weight when you hit a posture. Actually, that's just down, isn't it? So our quintessence wushu concepts of open, close, up and down, that's going to run right through all these videos. Such a simple idea. The reason you chop down is so that you can get body weight into the punch and drop it down, get weight behind the punch like that. That's the reason why you chop down. This idea of hitting into the jawline is just like an ideology that's bolted onto that afterwards. Once you understand that, then you understand that what we're talking about is power generation. The thing I've talked about right from the start, that when we form a configuration, the art of each one is, how do we get as much power possible in a posture within the reality of the context of the fight? That's one solution. You drop the weight down into it, and that's why people do it like that. what we want to do is, I mean, you see that in Yiquan all the time, the lean over as well, like that, leaning over, that gets power into the punch like that. I'll talk about that more in a bit when I talk about Han Xingyuan. That's what Yao Cheng Rong does, leans right over with the, that's all about making the posture bigger to get more power in it. So when someone says like, oh, in each one should always sink, it's like a partial understanding of the system. It's like, yeah, they've understood down, but we've also got opening and closing, and we've got different kinds of Farley where you can go for, like Xingyuan kind of Farley, rotational Farley. We've actually got other options. And in a scientific system, we start thinking about, well, actually, which is best. And it makes a lot of sense to say this kind of rotational Farley fits the movement of a hook much better than dropping down like that. The rotational Farley is a bigger movement. It gets more power in it than just dropping the weight down. But if you try and do both, generally speaking, the torso goes too far out of line with the punch, so you lose the structural integrity of the posture, and it becomes an overhand, and it becomes very reliant on this. The reason why we do these big overhands with a big lean like that, like in your mind you think it's to get out of the way of a punch, but actually it's about the generation of force. I mean, it's overdetermined, okay, it's moving you to the side, but in reality it's not getting you the way out of it. It's not getting you out of the way of the punch that's coming in from this hand here that's going to smack you in the face, the right hand that's going to uppercut you in the face. It's just an ideology that we assume because we're not thinking scientifically. Well, who says the punch is coming that way? Maybe the punch is coming that way, in which case this doesn't get you out of the way. No, what this is doing is adding power into the movement by a big lean over. Once we start seeing all these things, then all our understanding of each one postures starts to make a lot more sense, which is a lot of talk again. We're going to do it much more like Yao Cheng Wang with the rotational axis. We're going to move all that movement, even the movement that, for example, Yao Cheng Rong cuts in with a big lean over to the side. We're going to move all of that into the rotational axis and try and improve that part of the posture itself. That does a couple of interesting things as well that's worth pointing out at this time. We know mostly the exercise we've got to do, so I figure I've got a little bit more time to be a little bit more theoretical. When people say this thing about power coming from the leg, actually that's not true. That's not true at all. Our understanding of quintessence principles of Wushu tells us that what the leg does is root the posture, i.e. it gives it stability. Stability isn't about adding power into the posture, it's about solidifying the structure. Yeah, of course, in certain postures you can push with the foot and add in a little bit of force like that. The amount of force that actually adds is quite minimal. Like that power comes from the rotation of or even when it comes from the lean over like that, it comes from in each one, it comes from the movement of the torso and the body and the way for this kind of Yao Cheng Rong movement, the crooked axis that I've talked about before, or have I yet? Crooked axis movement like that, it's what we call crooked axis anyway. Crooked axis Farley, where you shift to the side like that. And you can push in a little bit with the foot like that. But actually you could push miles more with the foot, but you don't. So if power was really coming from the floor, you'd proper push like that. And of course you do that when you use a step. So if you just do it on the spot, however, it just reveals the secret that the actual basic posture doesn't actually produce power from the floor at all. It just solidifies the structure that, just as we talked about in the previous videos, allows the power to be transmitted through the body into the pot. It's our consistency. It's our consistency on the spot. Then when you start changing, when you start adding in steps and things like that, then you start feeling like, well, that is adding something in terms of power. But actually it's nothing compared to Farley itself, which is coming from the upper body like that. So let's say we just do it like rotational. Power is coming from the Farley, it's not coming from the floor. I don't know why that should need explaining in each one. Why would people start saying things like power comes from the floor? The whole idea is power comes from the intent controlling the body to do Farley with correct configuration and consistency. foot on the floor stabilises it. But the more you lean over with the posture, the more you feel like you're getting a push into the movement rather than just stabilising it, because it's a bigger movement. You feel the push. Whereas a shorter movement like that, it just shifts into position and stabilises with the hit. And you don't feel at that hit point that you're really pushing loads with it, you're just stabilising. Lean over and you really feel like that posture with the foot, the rooting posture becomes bigger and it feels much more like a push. This is the kind of thing we mean when we talk about Yiquan as a science, that we can break down within Yiquan itself how things are functioning. We can look at other Yiquan people, break down why they think certain things are happening in certain ways, and also other martial arts, and start looking at it scientifically and saying, does this make sense or not? Is there a different scientific explanation? This is what we've got to do to promote Yiquan, and we've also got to get past the people who are insisting that their completely unscientific explanations for things are correct. If you start pushing and dropping your weight and things like that, then you can really start over skewing postures, and when you start taking these things to extremes and adding them together, you start realising the explanation wasn't right. If the explanation's not right, then you're not teaching it right. Students can't get it. Anyway, next we start bringing it up to just a little bit sharper from hit and stop. And remember, we don't want any tells, so this is harder because the posture is longer. There's going to be a little bit of movement, it's just inevitable, but we're going to try and limit it completely. I'm going to try and put all my intention in this movement first, up to the hit and stop. Yeah, so I mean, one skimmed. So this is like a variation in, well, I just missed it, but this is a variation in, I do it all the time actually, like sometimes in on an angle like that, and sometimes you just try to skim across, like you imagine just skimming across the jaw, but really I just foreshortened the hook too much. Let's try it the other way. I can see it the other way. So up to the hit and stop like that, just to get the feedback into the posture. And you're going to know yourself when you come to do this that all kinds of things are then going to start happening. You're going to start going, you're going to start falling over, you're going to start pushing yourself back, and you're going to feel all that looseness in the posture that's got to be tightened up so that you can transmit the force. Just everything we talked about in the other videos, you don't need to go through it all over again. Then let's break it back down to more relaxed, lighter, but we'll do the hit and we'll do the pull back with it. Okay, we'll change the other way. See, I'm really near the wall. There isn't enough room for me to do a big looping hook like that anyway. See how tight this is? Tight, it doesn't need a big loop like that. We've taken this movement. See, if you look at how little my body actually moves when I do a loop like that, it's just this little bit on the end. And that's where you see some people in Yiquan, they're just putting the Farley there on this little kind of 10-degree movement with the rotation. It's already here, and then they just put the little Farley into the shoulder. Seen a few doing it like that. And then you also see the lean over to the side, and sometimes really exaggerated as well, which is legitimate for avoiding punches. And this is what you kind of got to get your mind round. There's a difference between skewing a posture to avoid a punch and skewing a posture to get power in the posture by making it bigger with the skew, what we call the skew, shifting it. side to side forward. You can skew in any direction, but in this case, it's something you see all the time. We'll talk about more in a moment. But it's wrong, so we want to break it down. And the reason it's wrong is that you don't want to do that every time. What if the punch is coming in that way? So if you always do this posture, like some people do in Yiquan, and in their mind, they're convincing themselves that what they're doing is moving out of the way and being harder to hit. No, you're being completely predictable. You're doing the same posture in the same way every single time. So as soon as someone sees you throwing a hook, they're just going to go for a counter hook because they know you're going to lean, and probably lean, particularly if you do it with far lee. They just got to stick their hand out. You're going to smack your head into the side of their fist with your own far lee. So it's a different way of thinking about it, a much more scientific way of thinking about it. And I don't know, some people might be upset about it because they've convinced themselves that this is being hard to hit, and it's not. It's creating a bigger movement in the posture and skewing it so that you can get more power in it. That's all it is. That's why people are doing that. It just seems over-determined in that you're moving your head around so it makes you harder to hit. It absolutely doesn't. It makes you completely predictable. This is why every generation of each one's got to be moving forward, scientifically, pushing the envelope forward, understanding why did people do things in the way that they did in the past? What's wrong with that? It's part of the revolution that Yao Zhongzhong really pushed forwards. And this idea that, well, you can change all this movement. You can change all of that. I know it looks great. It looks like, yeah, I'm moving right out of the way of a punch. Yeah, no, actually, I'm moving right into a punch. Why not? Why am I moving out of the way of a punch? Who says the punch is coming that way? You know, maybe the kick is coming that way. Someone can knee me from there, no problem. See it all the time. Big jumping knee right in the head. Why? Why am I moving out of the way of a punch? You know, why do I need to drop my weight? You know, why? I was looking at a video of Yao Chengguang. I can't remember what he was doing. I was looking at it a minute ago, where both his back heels come right off like a double lifted heel fishtail root. I don't know if we've looked at fishtail roots yet. Both his back, you know, why? You know, that's an extreme form of up. In fact, you can jump. It doesn't always have to be down. Drop the weight. What we've got to understand is it's all about different ways of generating power. That's everything that I talked about right from the start, and that leads people down the wrong path. They start doing things that are wrong because they're trying to generate more power. So having said that, I've completely lost track of the point that I was going to make, so let's just move on into... So what we'll do now, we'll do the hit and stop. No, we won't. We'll do the hit and the pull back just a little bit sharper and try and eliminate any pre-movement, and also avoid the temptation to push yourself up because you feel like that's going to add more power into the posture. I'm not saying it's illegitimate, but for our template posture, we want it absolutely off the spot, eliminate all pre-movement. What I'm saying is, if it's a bit like kicks, you want to jump up because that makes it easier. Take all the weight and inertia off the legs, then you can turn in the air rather than try to scrape the pivot root on the floor. Just feels like you can get more speed into the far lee if you jump a little bit. It just makes your root like a little bit more vulnerable. You have to do it for kicks, but you don't have to do it for this, and we want to avoid it. So we just want to go straight from here into the posture, but we're going to hit and pull back. And there isn't quite enough room for my pivot root. It's catching on the back there, which is just, I mean, these are the things that happen. Anything you say, some circumstance is going to happen where, you know, if you're against the wall, you can't do pivot roots with the foot. I mean, that's a well-known thing anyway with pivot roots. We're just experiencing it that. So nothing's perfect. Certainly not the way I do it. So we just want to and then pull back. So that feels to me much better straight away, and that's because I'm southpaw. And I can generate more force that way, much more powerful that way, just because that's the way the intention works, the way it's been socialised to work on one half of the body, your dominant side, better than your non-dominant side. So when I'm on my non-dominant side, there's much more, this celebration of intent, like it's some kind of godlike thing. And I've taught, well, I say somewhere anyway, maybe I've got videos filmed that are set to come out, so sometimes I forget the order, but intent's like a dog. It's not like a god. It's a dog that you've got to train and make it do what you want. Otherwise, the intent will just take the instruction to maximize power. That's the primary thing that it does in Yiquan. Maximizes power generation. That's something it can just do on its own. What it can't do, for the most part, is adapt to the reality and context of the fight. It can't have fight IQ. It just can't. It can react very fast in a fight, and it can hit really hard. It can understand how to form a configuration in the exact way to hit really, really hard. But what it can't do is know how to defend against someone who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or it can't think about how I'm going to avoid into this posture so I don't get smacked in the face. It won't think like that. It'll just think we'll just lean over like that and get more power into it, and just always do that because you get more power. And then people become captured by their own intent, where they just start always doing it like that. And then they come into a fight and someone spots that within 10 seconds and then just sparks them out. That's if they ever did any sparring, that might happen. That's the other thing, if you don't actually do any sparring, then you'll never find out these things. Actually, you've got to train all those things, as actual fight training, your fight IQ, and be very mindful of it and drill all of that in. Otherwise, the intent will it's like water just running downhill. And again, all these metaphors that we think are really, really positive, each one's all about contradiction. Intent has always got to be countered by actual fight training. All these people who are you just get Han Yuan Li and you can blah, blah, blah. That's why you never see them with the gloves on, giving it a go. So if I do something, of course we want to be ambidextrous, but if I do something orthodox, my intent isn't as good at that as it is southpaw. It isn't as good at generating power as it is southpaw. So orthodox, it will start slipping into bad habits, like trying to do things like jump up into the punch to make the foul easier, or leaning over or something like that. Whereas the other way, it's just knitting together the whole system, maybe 10-15% better. That's all it takes. Maybe it's even less. In many cases, you can't even tell. I think you could probably tell then from doing it on the bag, but if I do it on the air, you can't tell. It's so close. It's like identical twins that are just slightly different. Well, that slight difference makes all the difference. And all that difference is the way the configuration is constructed, or stacked is the term we use. The way the configuration is stacked and the way I'm using my body is better, just a few percent better on the southpaw side. That makes all the difference in terms of power generation, and it takes away from my intent the feeling that it needs to compensate by doing other things like leaning and jumping, which it does on the other side. This is the real scientific understanding of how E functions and what it is. It's so far beyond the glass theory that so many people are talking about, when it's just like Wang Xiangzhai says, let's see then. It's not even that, it doesn't make scientific sense. It's so basic. This kind of next gen stuff it's on another level, So what do we do next? Well, then we bring it even sharper. We'll bring it much sharper into our hit and stop, and these are all the basic exercises then that we've completed: hit and stop, and then hit and pull back. And I'll do a few either way. So just watch the difference now. In fact, I'll do two one way, and then I'll do two the other in turn. I'll try and control it as best as I can. Hit and pull back. Now my southpaw side. So, maybe it doesn't even physically look all that much different, but I'm telling you, I can feel it. I can absolutely feel it. There's a difference in power generation, power transmission. which is the thing we've talked about that most people don't talk about. It's not just power generation. It's not just Han Yuan Li. It's hitting things and getting feedback and transmitting power. It's consistency and so on. It's different one side than the other. Go on. Now, next I'll do with hit and stop. Go on. He's had an ace walkout. He's still soaking wet from the ace walkout that he's had today. Rolling in horse crap. Such a simple pleasure. So we'll do it. We didn't do hit and stop, so we'll do hit and stop. And we'll do the light Zhanzhuang, like this really key exercise that's so good for eliminating pre-movement. But it's a big movement, so you're going to see the movement before I hit the target, because it's a big posture. Hit and stop, hit and stop. Got a little bit of a movement, a little bit of a tell on my front foot there, and I know what that is. It's my intent is trying to do something, and you can scientifically engage your own movement like this and think about it like this. How I think about it. My intent is trying to do something there. It's just moving my front foot a little bit. Let's see if I can work out what it's trying to do. And it's trying to change it's trying to pull the foot back to create more rotational movement. It's trying to use this kind of reverse step farley to shorten the posture but add into the rotational force. That's what it's trying to do. So it's just moving that foot a little bit. So that's happening completely intuitively. You know, once you can spot those things, you can start working on them and drilling them out and thinking about them. This is the process. It's just like with Tourette's that I talked about. You don't ignore them. You bring them into your consciousness, out of the intuitive subconscious into your conscious. Then you can work on them. That's everything we're doing with Yiquan. Everything we're doing with standing, lifting it out of the intuitive subconscious, focusing on it, correcting it, and then putting it back into the intuitive subconscious as trained, drilled in movement. Let's try the other way. Yeah, it's not doing the same thing. We're getting a little bit of heel lift. Could drill that out pretty easy. You hear my foot hit the back wall. You see the space is too small for the pivot root. So maybe I can change it. I can do it without a pivot root. Just feels immediately the structure isn't quite as balanced. My foot was trying to compensate, like the posture tried to compensate. My intent tried to compensate by adding in the scrape rooting, like that. So this is the intent functioning. This is the danger. Like, okay, you want to train your intent to be able to maximize force. Well, this is the negative side of it, because it will do all these little things that you don't want it to do to maximize force, because actually maximizing force is only one thing that you want to do. I mean, it might not make all that much difference, but it might. So I don't want it out of control like that. I want to control this dog. I need it on a tight leash. I want it down to absolute minimal movement. That was the instruction. It's doing its own thing to create more power. So yeah, you want this, that the intent can do that, but it's got another side to it. And again, who do you ever hear talking about this stuff? It's just like no one. Where is all that content? I don't understand. Only if you break it down like this and train like this do you actually get this kind of level weight, this kind of level of, not my level of analysis of what you're doing and how intent actually functions. So, I'm doing hit and stop. And it's also good, the hit and stop's also good so you can check where your target is. So the first one then was too low. Wait a minute, maybe he's a smaller guy, but you know, I was intending to hit higher. Or was I? No, my intent just decided to hit lower because that's easier to generate power. If you hit lower in line with your own shoulder, that's more in line. The transmission of force is stronger. If you hit higher, it just ever so slightly, there's a little bit of force going offline, missing your shoulder, going that way. Maybe it's only 3-4%, but my intent calculates that and it makes me hit lower. It's why you see people in the gym all the time hitting lower like that, because they can get the hold, they can drop their weight into it like that, and they can get this really solid structure. That's their intent, try to, on a more primitive level, try to get the most power it possibly can. But that's what my intent did then. It just, because I wasn't being careful enough, it made the posture lower so that it would get like a few more percent in terms of power. This is what I'm saying, like, the intent can do that. The intent can't think like, maybe the guy's higher. Like, unless I give it that instruction, or unless I'm actually seeing the person and I go for the target. But left to its own devices, with the single instruction, generate as much power from this configuration as you can, it will skew the configuration into a different variation. Even if it can just get like 3 or 4% more power, because what the intent thinks is like, well, if I drop that a little bit lower, if I pull that in a little bit like that, and if I lean over like that, I can get maybe 10% more power on the posture, so it'll do it. It's a dog you've got to keep under control. All these people talking about mind force and Han Yuan Li, and like some kind of spiritual thing has entered their body, and you're just like, let me rephrase that. You know, and here I am doing this movement. You know what? Get on a bag and start seeing how your intent misleads you, and then rethink, get into the next gen, get into what's happening. So hit and stop. Wow. Hit and stop. Okay, go on. So this idea of taking away the big movement, like the big looping movement, and changing it into just like a spike sticking out, and putting the movement instead into the body, becomes much clearer when we think about a different problem that we need to solve. So this is something that I was seeing today when someone was talking about doing double backhand hooks. You're not going out, you've just been out, go on, full to speed. And you know, it's a really tough looking fight. I wouldn't like to have a fight with him, and his punches look like they'd knock you back in time. But he was going one big loop and then big loop, pull back, big loop for the double. Like that, and with the thumb up hook, doesn't matter how much which way did it, but 1, 2. So this is creating movement, and we're gonna, as I say, look at that in a whole series of videos, how we use that in each one. But the way that we understand that the principle is correct that we're getting at here is by thinking about that posture and how much movement, extra movement this is, and we want to put that movement instead into the body. What happens when we do that? So we're going to go like that, and we're going to go 1/4 rooting back a little bit, and then change into the hit like that. It's not necessarily going to be a like for like swap of power, but it's going to cut down all that dead time of doing the big swinging loop. And if we can get the power right now in the Farley, I mean, that's still, it's nowhere near full power. You can go and see me hitting a denser, heavier bag full power in my other videos. It's still nowhere near full power, but we're going to get, the potential is there if I want to do it full power. So we're going to go like that and just hit like that. I'm going to take away, we're just going to bring all that movement, this movement of the body, just from here to here. It's easily as big as doing it that way. That's easily as big a movement. We've just changed where it is, but we've eliminated dead time in the process. So We can argue about it, but the point is, it's demonstrable. I can demonstrate it and show and say, well, here's the scientific theory, here's the outcome, here's the idea. I can demonstrate it. Then we can argue about it. What we can't actually scientifically discuss is people who just talk endlessly about theory. So for the next gen, we've got to get beyond that nonsense. Some of the stuff that I read, it's just like, come on, let's see. I'm not even asking you to spar. Just get on a punch bag and show me. Show me your Han Yuan Li. Show me your, instead of talking about endless discussions about how to do Zhanzhuang from people who you never actually, it's never clear actually to me that they even do Zhanzhuang, which is a whole other thing. Like, I've not seen a video of them doing more than a minute, you know. And it's also nowhere near the same as push hands. Like, impact striking is a different thing from push hands, so you can't get it from that. So again, from the like that, and it changes the way that we're using the routing. And I'm still doing it light, you know. Right, I'll do it the other way. It changes these kind of double punch techniques you can bring into all your other ones, because once the energy is fed back into the body and you feel like, yeah, you're up to the 95% point and with that, do another one straight away, and it immediately, you're just a little bit off the balance with it. So it's really good. If we're going to do testing structure, that's a really good way of improving how you test structure. And it's the same, for example, if we go like that. We say instead of going hit, in, big loop out and hit like that. 1, 2, which we can do, of course, if that's the drill itself, like I do that, you throw a punch, I cover, then hit again. And we chain the movement like that. That's an entirely different thing to, well, I want to merge these two postures into one movement, like 1, 2, straight away like that. What do? Do I hit in, swing back and then get a big swing in it? All this is getting more movement into the strike, and then I just put the Farley on like that little bit at the end. 1, 2 with it. Or do I 1 and get all that movement transposed into the body movement itself? This is what we're aiming at. Biggest movement in shortest space, most power from smallest movement. That's what it really means. Let's do a couple of those. I'll do them light, nice and light. No. So I can change doesn't make any difference if I change what my other hand is doing from the template posture. Here we're just learning the use of the other arm to add power into the strike and maintain this active guard. But I can just as easily go like that and do it like that. So that's the theory, and we can start expanding and looking at that a bit more in other videos. Because the thing I wanted to talk about, kind of finish talking about, is this quite long hook itself, the length of it. Whereas usually what you'll see is people say the arm's got to be 90 degrees, like that. And if you start training it like that, and they say like, well, I saw someone anyway saying like you miss a lot because it's short range, so you're throwing them and you're missing them. Well, if you always train your template posture to be 90 degrees like that, then you will ingrain that in, you will drill it in, and of course you'll miss loads like that. This is what I started out by saying. We want to be able to intuitively adapt. One thing that the intent can do is judge the range and change the posture, because if you've got arms, you've got an elbow joint, you can change the range, how you hit, you can change it, and the intent can do that as well within its remit. But if you like a dog, if you train it to always do the same thing like that, then it will, and then it will miss. It will inevitably miss. So I think at some point it will inevitably miss, and then you'll start thinking, well, it's not a very useful technique because it always misses. And I saw someone, you know, an MMA instructor, quite a famous YouTuber, it was Ramsey Dewey, talking about this and saying this, you know. It's like, yeah, but that's because your template posture is 90 degrees rather than following the doctrine of the mean and having the template posture in the middle. He's also the one who says always hit down with the cross. Template posture in the middle, and then practice other template postures like this. And I saw someone else, another different MMA instructor, saying like, it's got to be flat in, it's got to be, because this gets all your strength and structure behind the punch. And someone else saying, another MMA instructor saying like, make sure you get your elbow right in line with the fist, because that puts all your weight behind the punch. It's like, that doesn't mean anything. Why does that put your weight, you know, what does the elbow weigh? It doesn't get all your weight behind a punch. It's not actually necessary to get all your weight behind a punch. Like for our lead hand hook, we're actually leaning back with the weight. Why do people want to put all the weight in like that? Because their intent thinks that's going to give me loads more power. Actually, it probably only gives you like 2 or 3% more power to go like that with the punch like that. That's why usually people go off to the side and not forward like that. That gets your weight into the punch. You know, if you lean over with it, then you can start getting your weight into the punch. But actually that's not coming from your elbow. It's not weight behind your elbow. It's just weight in your structure, and then everything else is what we talked about, these shortly contracted muscles making a strong structure. So far be it from me to criticise people who would knock me out in 10 seconds in the ring. I recognise that it's an analytical question, it's a scientific question about, as Wang Xiangzhai says, people's explanations that don't make any sense, even if they are quite good at what they do. So this idea that if you hit up, your structure isn't behind the punch, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What that is, if you hit up, your structure is exactly behind the punch in exactly the same way that I've talked about. You lose this kind of kinetic chain with a jab, and if you have a 90 degree hook like that, that is all kind of controlled by this muscle group, so there's nothing pushing back into the muscle like there is with a long hook like that I talked about in the lead hand hook video. You lose that, there's no kinetic chain whatsoever into the body. That's why the whole idea of kinetic chain is a very limited concept. Instead we use whole body consistency and think about how can we maximize our ability to use our muscles as a system, which there's a limit to, but we can think about the way muscles, sinews integrate. Bones are also a very important part of that, the way that the bone structure is aligned. It's far more than just this primitive idea of fascia or something like that. It's far more complex idea, it's the whole body. And we can compensate to some degree for the fact that we're losing this link back into the solid that we would have in Xing Yiquan, this solid structure. We're losing that. We compensate that more for alignment, not just strength, but the way that the muscles work together as a system, which requires them to relax and integrate, and a lot of timing in the way that the posture functions. If you're just always used to doing it 90 degrees like that, you always just have this really strong structure like that, and you don't develop into like a different way of being able to intuitively change the subtleties of the way that your body integrates its system, which is what we're trying to get at in each one. So I've talked before about if you want to hit up like that, there's this slightly different phase in the movement like this. You hit up like that, it's just slightly different, and we're aware that of things like up, down, open, close, this primitive Chinese martial arts stuff that people have been slagging off and criticising for 20 years and saying it's garbage. Actually, it's world leading. It's world leading. It's just waiting for it's waiting for the right thing to be put forward so that people can see it's world leading. Using this, it's a little bit. It's a kind of short power where we just get this phase into the movement, and we use up to compensate for loss of structure. So there's different ways that you can get power into the punch. The more solid and in line it is, the more you can transmit force to the target. The more it's offline, the more you lose that. That's why we want the doctrine of the mean with this longer hook. But if it's shorter, we lose that. The energy's going that way. And we have to compensate for it if we want to keep. But the intent's got a bag of tricks that it can use. And the bottom of that bag of tricks is open, close, up and down. So it can use up like that, just as when it hits this way. Guess what? What does it use? It uses down. And hits down like that. Down, drop the weight. Down, up, down. What's this? Close. What's this? Open. You know, all these different hooks. Open for the hook. Close because the hips are coming together. Up, down. Open, close, up, down. This is the real thing. This is why it all knits together and makes sense. It's the real thing. I'm sorry. I know there's people making a living teaching stuff that isn't the real thing. And I know it's their mortgage payments and so on, but I'm sorry, but this is the real thing. And that stuff isn't. But it's only if you train in a system that's working around the idea that techniques are secondary that you can ever get to this, because it's only when you start thinking techniques are secondary that you start working on higher level body movement principles. I know, I understand. It's not about whether you can beat those people in a fight, and Wang Xiangzhai himself says that. It's about if you take these principles and teach them to those people, then they improve. That's the idea, that's the theory. That if you can get these higher level body movement principles popularized, then we can revolutionize everything. So if you focus on quintessence movement principles, then you can think about things like short power and getting the articulated movement. You can think about things like how you articulate and use down into a strike, you know, just like we use up with an uppercut. You can start thinking about those things and how they put together, and it starts explaining some of the things that other people are teaching, where they might be great in themselves, they might be great fighters, but their explanation for what they're doing is way behind. It's not scientific. So let's just do one last thing where we think about that and we bring in this idea of the science of Yiquan. And so you'll notice that this very long hook that I'm doing, I mean, it comes from the fact that I'm starting from the template posture for everything that's this. So I'm not going to start doing things like using compensatory power like a step or something like that, which again you see all the time in Yiquan. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But I'm doing everything off the spot like that. So by definition, if I'm going to do it like a 90 elbow at 90 degrees, like for example Yao Cheng Rong does, I'm going to miss every one. It's going to miss, it's going to go nowhere near the target, no matter how I do it, whether I do it with rotational farley or I do it with a skew, I'm going to miss the target. This much longer hook, if you're a bit of an Yiquan aficionado, then you'll probably know this is Han Xingyuan's hook. It's one of his 12 fist forms for Yiquan, the long hook like that. But he doesn't quite do it like this, so there's a couple of things that are different. Doesn't have much of a rotation on it like that, just a little bit, just like I do. But what he does do that's very different is he has the other hand down like that, and it's always done like that. Now, there are a lot of people who claim some kind of connection to Han Xingyuan, and I haven't seen anyone actually who moves like him. If you go and look at his movement is beautiful. It's really apex level, but everyone is within their cave of time. It's captured within a particular time frame of Yiquan. And our scientific problem is like, well, why does he do that? Why does he drop this hand like that? So the first thing you can say is it doesn't make any difference in terms of the generation of force. Like if this other hand is like a counterweight, then it doesn't matter whether it's here or low like that. It works in exactly the same way like that. It has a slightly different way of doing it anyway. It doesn't use rotational fairly, so that's our other clue. So you could think like, and this is true, so you know, Han Xingyuan's Yiquan is very closely related to Xing Yiquan. It's a creative adaptation. Well, it's comes from Wang Xiangzhai, obviously. And what they're doing in that period, that early period, is a creative improvement on Xing Yiquan. So it's very tempting then to say, well, the reason why the hand's down is like, it's like a version of Xing Yiquan. So they're trying to keep some Xing Yiquan principles. So they're keeping this, pulling the other hand back like that kind of posture, like they're trapped, they can't quite move on. It's creative, it's moved on from Xing Yiquan, but they can't quite move on. This would be the line of argument that you might take. Therefore they've come to this kind of hybridized movement like that. I'm going to say that's not it, and I'm going to say the question that we're really asking here, and if each one is really a science, and what I'm talking about is true, and this is the real thing, this is the real understanding for this generation of each one thinking, where we should be at, we should be able to explain things like, why does Xing Yiquan have a fist down here in the first place? That's the real clue. The second clue is the way that Han Xingyuan moves. I mean, his movement is beautiful. It's what we call a cultural set, so it's quintessence principles of wushu expressed through the cultural framework of Xing Yiquan, and it creates a kind of, I'm not going to say hybrid, that's insulting, it's not a hybrid, it's a wonderful creative evolution from Xing Yiquan, the kind of thing they were working on at that time with Wang Xiangzhai. So it also doesn't use rotational fairly as such, just like a tiny little bit. It uses much more of the moving forward like. And in videos to come, I'm going to look much more in depth at how Yiquan evolved from Xing Yiquan, not just for the historical sake, but because of how much it teaches us to understand about how Yiquan can and does function. So this movement round this very characteristic way of using Farley from the quad axis like that to generate force. Flat-footed route. I'm going straight into a pivot route, but we want a flat-footed route like that. Keeping this other hand down like that. Using this rotation, this horizontal use of Farley from the quad axis to generate force. The thing about that is, the thing that kind of each one kind of, as it develops, kind of learns this, and I'll talk about this elsewhere, but that's really useful for some kinds of postures. But it's not the most powerful way to do certain other postures. For example, it's not the most powerful way to do a hook. Rotational axis is the most powerful way to do a hook, because it's in line with the hook in a way that isn't. You can do that, but that's more powerful. And it's less effort to get more power as well. So it fulfills that Yiquan paradigm, let's say, better. Out of the, say, I don't know how many people I saw, 10 different ways of doing a hook in each one. Let's say they all fulfill the quintessence principles of wushu one way or another. But our question is, for a particular reason, which is the best way of doing it? What's the answer to that? What's the right way of doing a hook to solve this particular problem? A really clever thing we can do here, it's like being on my actual university class. Yes, I do have actual university classes. A really clever thing we can do is reverse that question and say, what is the problem that this was trying to solve? Not like, here's the problem we want to solve. So we can say, okay, the problem might be like, I want to punch someone in the side of the head really hard. Let's not look at it like that. If you want to really unpack each one and other martial arts and begin to think like this, if you can think like this, you can change your own movement. That's the key. And ask instead, what problem is this actually trying to solve, keeping the hand down here like that? when we do that. What's that trying to solve? What problem is that? It's not just getting more power with oppositional force or anything like that. It's a weird guard. You might say it's about bringing a hand down and punching, something like that. That's far too specific for each one. This is a template posture. It's supposed to be a middle ground posture. So it's nothing ultra specific like that. What problem is it trying to solve? It's the same problem as why does Xingyuan have the hand back like that? And the answer is really, really simple. It's just creating more space. This isn't a very powerful movement as such when you use this kind of Farley floral hook. It's not a powerful movement. So you try and compensate for that by creating more space. It's the simplest thing that runs all the way through wushu. How do we get more space in a posture? How do we make a posture bigger, therefore get more power in it? That's all that is. It's nothing to do with what's happening with the punching hand. That's the counterintuitive thing that you've got to get your mind around. It's nothing to do with what's happening with the punching hand. It's to do with what this hand's going to do next, which is throw the punch. And this is a longer distance than this. It's as simple as that. It's a slightly longer distance and you can get more power. And you'll also notice, and this is another reason why you know this is right, is that it's always done with compensatory force, i.e. it's always done with a step. So, what does a step do? Even a step backwards is making a posture bigger. It's getting more movement into the posture. Step forwards is getting body weight into the posture and making the posture bigger. Step backwards is making the posture bigger. So you can get more power into the posture. It's all about what this hand's going to do next, which is punch. It's making the posture bigger, and that's why the hand is down there like that. It's as simple as that. It's not trying to ape Xingyuan. It's the same reason it occurs in Xingyuan. It's just been slightly modified. It's the same reason like it relies on compensatory power pretty much to function. And it's the same reason you might get a little bit of a swirl. What's this doing? It's creating more movement in the punch. It's so simple, but once you see it, you just like, it unravels like 60% of wushu and like at least 90% of the each one that you ever see. Why are they doing all of that? What is this? It's creating more movement, and what looks like moving out of the way, it also leans. That also gets more power into it. So you combine that together, you've got the slightly higher, slightly longer posture from down here. You've got the step as compensatory force, and you've got the lean over. Then you add in the Farley from the waist. And just by doing those three things, the step, the longer punch and the lean over, you can get maybe 10-15% more power in the punch. That's the intent leading the posture. You've got to get that under control. Like the movement itself, when he does the movements, are beautiful. I'm going to say they're in a kind of cave of time, and that's why eventually they started getting changed, and that's why eventually the Yao brothers particularly started changing to this higher. You can see it evolve through Yao's each one particularly higher. Then that gets, I mean, let's be clear, that's stuck in a cave of time as well, because we actually need much more than this now. We need all different kinds of active guard movement and changing from, you know, into different, that's a whole other stage. Everyone's just in their cave of time. Everything I'm telling you here now is in a cave of time. Hopefully 20 years from now, this is all taken to another level. But that reveals that mystery of why we do it. But the longer hook itself, if we just change that and bring in like a different kind of guard, it doesn't have to be this Yao Brothers active guard, it could just even be like that. And we change the horizontal axis Farley to rotational Farley again from Yao Zongzun, that we can get all that power but be more in harmony with the reality of the context of the fight. A guard up here is better than a guard down here. And we don't need, in fact, even if your guard is up here, you can still get like this extra distance. It's just odd to get in the power, so you start needing to do more of a loop like that. Whereas if it's out here, it can just dink straight in like a spike. And this is just more in harmony with the reality of the fight. You take all of that excess movement, you don't even need the compensatory power of the step. if you use it, that adds in extra. You don't need the compensatory power of a lean over. Like I say, Yao Chen Rong still does that, I have to say. But you can take all of those things and put them in your body. And that just radically improves the posture, in my view. Doesn't improve the quality of the movement. You can do all those things and not have the same kind of apex level whole body connectivity of Han Xingyuan, which I think is... I've only seen Han Xingyuan as an old man, I've only seen videos of it as a really old man, but Han Xingyuan's whole body interconnectivity is absolutely top drawer. And what have I always said? It doesn't matter if your whole body interconnectivity is top drawer. What matters is the reality of the context of the fight and how you bring that into, how you keep that socially evolving. And then finally, what that really does tell us is, like, you've got all these charlatans who claim legitimacy by saying they trained with Han Xingyuan. And they're the ones who, like, they've got magic powers like the Emperor off Star Wars, and if they touch you, you fly back and shit like that. And it's like, if that was true, if that skill level was true, Han Xingyuan wouldn't do all of those things. He wouldn't need to lean, he wouldn't need this extra distance, he wouldn't need compensatory force from a step. He'd just be able to zap you like the Emperor from Star Wars. He wouldn't need, just the fact that he does all of these things, once we understand the paradigm itself, tells us that he actually hits with real force. That's why this is all working out like that, so that he can maximise the real kinetic force that he hits you with. And that's that. So all of those things I'm going to unpack in more depth. I'll just flag it up now. I've used the space and time to talk about these more advanced concepts, so it's like doing a degree in each one. I recognise that, so I'm hoping that that's useful. In the meantime, that's it. Thanks very much for watching. Hope that made sense. If it didn't, then don't worry. I'm going to expand on all of these concepts and how we think about bringing bigger movement and articulated movement out of the posture and putting it back in the body by the way that we use articulated movement and Farley. That's going to really open people's minds, I think. I hope, about how real Yiquan actually functions. Can only reiterate, like, we've got to be able to criticise the past on the things that matter. Like if I could get Han Xingyuan's level of whole body interconnectivity, I could die happy. But that doesn't change the fact that the whole fight world moves on, and we've got to think about how people move and keep upgrading, keep rebuilding. That's what we want. That's what I want the future to do. So, one love, take it easy, and I will definitely see you in the next one.